Chutes and Ladders has been around in some form for over 200 years. The game actually started in India, and over there it was called Snakes and Ladders. It was brought over to this country in the 1840s, and the name was changed to Chutes and Ladders. But the object of the game was always the same. You wanted to advance your piece from square number 1 to square 100 as quickly as possible so you can win the game. And you did this by spinning a dial. However, along the way, you might encounter a square that had a ladder in it. This was always a good thing because you would climb up that ladder and you could skip maybe 10 squares, 20 squares, sometimes even more than that, and get way ahead and be able to win the game more quickly. Maybe. You might, however, come along to a chute. Well, some of the chutes were kind of short, but some of them were pretty long, and that one I showed the children started at square number 84 and went all the way down to square number 24. It's almost like starting all over. In fact, Chutes and Ladders is the origin of the saying, back to square one. Well, if my life were compared to the game of Chutes and Ladders, I must admit I have been spending most of my life trying to climb ladders and trying to avoid chutes. I was climbing ladders when I was very young. I was trying to get good grades, and then I was trying to get into the best schools, and then I was climbing a ladder trying to get promoted in my place of work, and on and on. I even climbed a ladder that gave me 3 master's degrees. Lots and lots of ladders. But back in my 40s, I ended up landing on a square that had a chute in it. And it took me way back close to the very beginning. I lost my job at Lutheran General Hospital, and I was confused and disoriented for several years after that. I had worked there 18 years, and I went back there recently, actually just this last week. I went over to visit Nancy Hawks, and while I was there, and I was walking the halls with Chris, I was looking for any sign of what was there when I was there, which is now a good long while ago. And I saw a few pictures of people that I recognized, but generally speaking, let's just say there wasn't much of a trace. And I looked around at all the faces, and I didn't see any familiar faces either. So sadly, as I was walking out the door of Lutheran General, I had this little bit of bitterness in my heart. It was kind of like this feeling of, well, this place seems to be getting along just fine without me. Well, Jesus is going to tell a story to us today about people who are arriving at a dinner with the Pharisee. And he noticed that all the people that were coming to dinner were trying to get the very best seats, a little bit like climbing up those ladders. So join with me in listening to this story that begins in Luke 14, verse 7. When Jesus noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down in a place of honor in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you may come and say to you, give this person your place. And then, in disgrace, you would start to take the lower place. But when you are invited, go and sit down in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. So Jesus was watching these dinner guests as they arrived. Now, we don't even know exactly where Jesus was sitting. Maybe he was sitting in the very lowest seat. But he was watching, and he noticed everybody was taking those higher seats. So he gave them a little bit of advice. That's how this story kind of sounds. He said, don't be walking in and taking the highest seat because, well, you might not be the most honored guest. And you don't want to be embarrassed in front of everyone and told to take some seat way back in the corner. You better if you took that seat way back in the corner and the host came and said, here, have this wonderful seat. It seems that none of us really wants to be in the worst seat in the house. Nope. And none of us wants to be going down any chute either. What we want to do is to find out who won the gold medal in the Olympics. And we want to find out whose team got the team trophy. Who gave the most to the opera this year? That's what we want to know about. We want to know about the winners. We want to be climbing. We aren't going to be bothered with all these people that, well, let's just say aren't really noticeable that much and mostly have been shoved into some corner and marked as losers by our ladder climbing world. I mean, if we started hanging around with people like that, well, people might think we were, well, let's just say one of them, or maybe we might even, just by hanging around them, even become a loser. And we don't want to do that. We want to climb higher and higher, get to the highest point, the top of the mountain. That's where we want to go. But you know, there is some disadvantages to climbing, going higher and higher and higher. The main one is you pass up a whole lot of people along the way. People who are not going to get as high as you. And after a while of climbing, you just basically don't notice these people anymore. They become some sort of blur, and you don't even remember that you passed them. You're way ahead, and you don't have to think about those other people that are sliding down chutes. You might even miss Jesus. You know, if you're trying to climb to the executive suite, you may not run into Jesus. Actually, Jesus was born in a barn. Now, most of those of us who are climbers are not going to go rooting around in barns and stables to find an important person. No, we're going to expect that person to be on the top floor, and that's where we want to get to as well. But that is not where we find Jesus. Paul describes Jesus this way. He says Jesus was in the form of God, but he emptied himself of all of the power that form of God gave him, and he humbled himself, and he appeared here on earth in human form as a slave, and he was obedient, even to death, even death on a cross. So when this particular story took place, it was right before the time when Jesus decided to go down the chute that led to Jerusalem. You know, he could have stayed in Galilee. He was doing really well there. He had large crowds that were following him, and he was getting more and more crowds each day. He could have had a massive following. He could have started a church, after all. But no, he did not stay there. He went to the place that killed all the prophets. He headed for Jerusalem. And when he got there, he washed his disciples' feet. He rode in on a donkey. He bent down and blessed widows and lepers. He never even said a word when the one who would betray him left the meal. He allowed himself to be arrested. He allowed himself to be mocked. He climbed a hill with a heavy cross on his holy back, bearing not only our sins, but all of our sorrows. And after he died, he was laid deep in a tomb, and a massive stone was rolled in front of it, Jesus took the steepest, longest chute of all, more than any of us will ever suffer. He has suffered all that we suffer, and so much more. He wasn't climbing ladders. He was going down the chute. And he was teaching us that the important thing is not to climb. The important thing is to become humble. But how on earth are we ever supposed to do that? Well, he has some advice, and he told his dinner guests, when you invite someone to your house and throw a party, don't invite your friends and all the important people in town, and don't be inviting folks who can help you out. Invite instead the poor, the lame, the blind, all of those people that have been shoved in some corner by all our ladder climbers and forgotten while we have been climbing high as we can. Invite those people to a meal. I don't believe I've ever intentionally done that. It has happened, but I don't think it was ever my intention. But I heard a story of someone who did, and I share it with you today. Maddie Keating. Maddie is, how old is Maddie? 6. Maddie is 6. Wow. I'm 65, and I still haven't learned, so Maddie has something to teach me today. I think it was last summer, Maddie and her family were all gathered at Walton Island. And they were having a big family pizza party picnic that day. But Maddie noticed that there were some homeless people that were not too far away from them. And so she went over to them and she invited them to their pizza party. And so they came over and they all enjoyed pizza together. Wow, what a wonderful thing. So the next day, I heard about this from Brian. But then when I talked to Maddie's mom this week, I found out that wasn't even the whole story. I thought that was enough for me to be taught. But there's more to Maddie's story. After she first invited her homeless friends, she saved her allowance for as long as it took to buy Subway sandwiches for them. And then her family had to go hunting around downtown Elgin to find her homeless friends because they had moved. They weren't in the same spot anymore. So they were actually on the lookout for the homeless, the ones that Maddie knew. And then she gave her sandwiches to them as a gift. Wow. Remember, Jesus said, if you want to learn humility, invite the poor, the homeless, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. You know, we don't really believe that people that are downtrodden, people who suffer, can have much to offer us. Actually, suffering for most of us is something that we don't want to experience ourselves and don't particularly want to be around for too long. Suffering's very difficult. And especially if it's a loved one who is suffering, it is so hard to manage really being with that person. But what Jesus is saying in this parable and what Maddie has taught us is that if we extend ourselves, our lives, our homes, our hospitality to these people who are suffering, whether they're homeless or they're ill, whether they're hungry or they're lame or blind, we will receive something in return, even though they will never, ever be able to repay us. We will receive a blessing and a lesson in humility. You know, humility isn't something that we can really learn all by ourselves alone. Trust me, I've tried it. Humility is something we must learn from others. Because when we work on it by ourselves, usually what happens is we work really, really hard on becoming more humble, and then we notice, oh, look how humble we are. And then we congratulate ourselves, oh, I'm really growing in my humility. And, well, let's just say we go right back to square one. But if we allow people who suffer, people who have gone down that chute like Jesus, to be in our presence, and we extend ourselves to them, our hearts and our minds and what we have, we will be taught. And we will be blessed.